My brother sabotaged my wedding with his birthday party. My parents chose his party over my wedding. But when they showed up at my house at 4 a.m. screaming and threatening me, I sued them, and now they have a restraining order. They never saw it coming. I'm 31 years old. I work in software sales. And I need to tell this story because what happened a few months ago still has me processing a ton of emotions I didn't even know I could feel at the same time. My family, or what's left of it, basically completely exploded around my wedding. And when I say exploded, I'm not exaggerating. It ended with a restraining order and all the drama you can imagine. But let me start from the beginning because this goes back years, even though I didn't realize it until everything fell apart. I grew up in a pretty normal family, I guess, or at least that's what I thought. I have a younger brother, Preston, who's 28 now, and since we were kids, there was always something weird about him. You know, that type of person who always needs to be the center of attention. That if something isn't about him, then he simply doesn't care, or worse, actively tries to ruin it. When we were kids, I thought it was an age thing, that he'd mature, but it never happened. My parents always defended him, like they always had an excuse for him, that he was the youngest, that he needed more attention, that I should be more understanding because I was the older brother, and all those things they tell you when you're a kid that make you feel guilty for simply existing. The truth is, I spent most of my teenage years feeling like I didn't matter much in my family. But well, you normalize those things when you grow up with them. You know what I mean? Preston and I grew apart over the years, especially after I moved away to go to college about 5 hours from where we grew up. He stayed close to my parents, never went to college, started working as a freelancer doing graphic design or something like that. Basically work-from-home jobs that allowed him to keep living in my parents' basement until he was 26. I, for my part, built my life. Met Sarah when I was like 27. We started dating after a year, and by the time I turned 30, we knew we wanted to get married. Amazing. Honestly, she's an elementary school teacher and has that infinite patience that I definitely don't have. And during all the time we were dating, she always noticed that my relationship with my family was kind of strange, but she never said anything until we started planning the wedding. We got engaged in December last year, like a simple proposal at home during the holidays, nothing extravagant but perfect for us. We decided to get married in September, because we wanted a fall wedding. Sarah always dreamed of that, and we started planning everything with like 9 months' notice. We booked a beautiful hotel about 8 hours from where we live now, in a mountain area that Sarah loves, sent out invitations 6 months in advance. I mean, we did everything right. Everything with enough time for people to plan and ask for days off work and all that. Preston got his invitation just like everyone else, my parents too, my extended family, Sarah's friends, everyone. The date was a Saturday at the end of September. Everything was going well, or at least I thought it was going well, until literally 2 weeks before the wedding, I got a message from my cousin Laura asking if I'd seen the invitations Preston had sent out. I had no idea what she was talking about. I told her no, and she sent me a photo of a printed invitation, like one of those fancy ones that look professional, inviting everyone to Preston's 28th birthday party. And guess when it was? Friday night before my wedding, like at 7 at night, in the city where my parents lived, which is 8 hours from my wedding venue. I stood there, staring at that photo on my phone, unable to believe it. Sarah was there with me, and when I showed her the invitation, she went pale. Like literally the color drained from her face. The first thing I did was call Preston, obviously, because I thought it had to be a mistake, that maybe he'd planned this months ago and forgot about my wedding date or something. Although deep down, I already knew that wasn't the case, because Preston is many things, but forgetful isn't one of them. He answered on the third ring, all casual, and I asked him directly, "Preston, what's the deal with your birthday party, the Friday before my wedding?" And he just laughed, like that fake uncomfortable laugh, and said, "Oh yeah, I decided to do something special this year since I'm turning 28. Are you coming?" And I was in shock. I told him, "Preston, my wedding is the next day, 8 hours away. You sent the invitations 2 weeks ago. People won't be able to go to both things." And he just said, "Well, then they can decide which one they want to go to more," and hung up. Just like that, hung up the phone. I called my parents immediately. I was furious but also trying to stay calm because I thought they were going to be on my side, that they were going to tell Preston he was being ridiculous. and that he had to cancel his party or move it to another day. But when I explained the situation, my mom just sighed and said, "Well, son, Preston already sent the invitations and booked the venue. He can't cancel now." And I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told her, "Mom, he sent the invitations 2 weeks ago. I sent mine 6 months ago." And my dad got into the conversation and said, "Look, Cameron, we can't force Preston to change his party. It's his birthday. And besides, you guys are going to have your day anyway. I don't see what the problem is." I don't see what the problem is. That's what my dad told me. As if his younger son wasn't obviously trying to sabotage my wedding. I tried to explain to them that this wasn't normal. That Preston clearly did it on purpose, to compete with my wedding or to force the family to choose. But my mom just kept defending him, saying I was overreacting. That Preston just wanted to celebrate his birthday. That not everything was about me. That phrase hurt more than I expected. Not everything is about you, Cameron. As if I was the selfish one in this. A situation when I had literally planned my wedding 9 months in advance, and my brother decided to throw a birthday party with 2 weeks' notice the day before. I asked them directly, "So you're going to go to Preston's party instead of my wedding?" And there was a long silence. A very long one. Until my dad said, "We'll see what we can do." And I knew in that moment they'd already made their decision. They just didn't want to tell me yet. The next few days were horrible. I got messages from several relatives asking what was going on with the situation. Some saying they were obviously going to my wedding and that Preston was crazy. Others asking if we could do something to resolve this as a family. I didn't want to talk to Preston anymore, and my parents weren't returning my calls. Until like a week before the wedding, my mom finally called me and told me they had decided to go to Preston's party because, and I quote, "We can't leave him alone on his birthday. It would be cruel, and besides, your wedding is going to be full of people. You won't miss us." "You won't miss us," my mom told me, at my wedding, as if that was a normal thing to say. I asked her if she was serious, if they were really going to miss my wedding, the most important day of my life up to that point, for a birthday party that Preston literally organized to screw me over, and she got upset with me, told me I was being dramatic, and that I had to understand that Preston also needed support from his family. I hung up that call and cried for the first time in years. Like really cried, like I hadn't since I was a kid. And Sarah hugged me and told me we were going to have a beautiful wedding anyway. That the people who mattered were going to be there, and that if my parents wanted to miss that, then it was their problem, not ours. She was right. I knew it. But it still hurt a lot. I sent a message to all my extended family, cousins, uncles, grandparents who were still alive, explaining the complete situation. Because I knew Preston and my parents were going to tell their version, and I needed them to know the truth. Basically, I told them, "Look, this is the timeline of events. These are the dates when invitations were sent, and you can decide where to go, but I just want you to know the facts." The response was overwhelming, honestly. Almost all my extended family sent me messages of support saying that, of course, they were going to my wedding, that Preston's thing was insane, and several of my older cousins even called my parents to tell them they were making a huge mistake. My uncle Roberto, my dad's older brother, directly told my dad he was an idiot and that he was going to regret this decision. But my dad is stubborn as a mule and had already taken his position. Preston didn't back down either. In fact, he started posting on social media about his upcoming epic birthday party, putting up photos of the venue he'd booked, a kind of crappy event hall in the city, and basically trying to make his party sound like it was the event of the year. Friday arrived, the day of Preston's party, and Sarah and I were already at the hotel where the wedding would be the next day. We'd arrived Thursday night to have time to prepare everything and rest, and most of our guests started arriving Friday during the day. My cousins, my uncles, my grandparents, Sarah's friends, her whole family, everyone kept arriving, and the hotel filled up with happy people excited about the wedding. And I tried not to think about the fact that my parents were at that moment going to Preston's party instead of being there with me. Around 8 at night, when I figured Preston's party must have already started, my cousin Laura sent me a message with photos that someone else had sent her. Photos of Preston's party, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The hall was practically empty. There were like 10 people there, all clearly friends of Preston from his work or something. No relatives except my parents, who looked uncomfortable sitting at a table near the entrance. Preston was trying to look happy, but you could tell he was furious, and there was a huge cake with candles that nobody was eating. Turns out basically the whole family decided not to go to Preston's party and go to my wedding instead. Like it wasn't even a difficult decision for them. They simply saw what Preston was doing and said no. We're going with Cameron. Laura told me that several relatives didn't even respond to Preston's RSVP, they just ignored him completely. And the only ones who went were my parents, because basically they had no other choice after making a whole show about supporting Preston. I felt bad for a second. Like I thought, well, maybe this went too far. But then I remembered that Preston had literally orchestrated this whole situation to ruin my wedding, and honestly, he earned it. The wedding on Saturday was perfect. I can't describe it any other way. It was exactly what Sarah and I wanted. The weather was amazing. Sunny, but not too hot. The tree leaves were starting to change color. The ceremony was outdoors with the mountains in the background, and Sarah looked absolutely beautiful in her dress that she'd chosen after trying on like 50 different options. When I saw her walking toward me with her dad, I felt like I was going to start crying right there in front of everyone, and I think a couple tears actually came out, but everyone was crying anyway, so nobody bothered me about it. During the vows, I tried not to think about the fact that my parents weren't there. I tried to focus on Sarah and on all the people who did take the trouble to travel 8 hours to be with us, and it worked. Honestly, it was the happiest day of my life despite everything. The reception was at the same hotel. We had a big room reserved, and we had an amazing time. There was dancing, really good food, emotional speeches from Sarah's friends and some of my cousins, and at no point did I feel like something I was missing because of my parents' absence. Well, that's a lie. I did feel it, but it didn't ruin the day. Around 10 at night, right when we were cutting the cake, my phone started ringing. It was my mom calling, and I was going to ignore the call, but Sarah told me to answer it, that maybe they wanted to apologize or something. I answered, and my mom was crying, like sobbing on the phone, and for a second I thought something horrible had happened, that someone had died or something, but then she started yelling at me, saying it was my fault that the whole family hated Preston now, that I had poisoned everyone against him, that I had ruined my brother's birthday, and that I should be ashamed of myself. I stood there with the phone to my ear, listening to my mom yell at me at my own wedding, while Sarah looked at me with a worried face, and all I could say was, "Mom, I'm at my reception right now. I'm going to hang up," and I did before she could keep yelling. I explained to Sarah what had happened, and she got furious, like angrier than I'd ever seen her, and told me my parents were completely out of control and that we needed to establish serious boundaries. I agreed, but in that moment, I just wanted to enjoy what was left of my wedding, so I put away the phone and tried to forget about it for the rest of the night. Sunday morning, while Sarah and I were having breakfast with some guests who had stayed at the hotel, I started getting messages from several family members saying that my parents and Preston had sent a mass email to the whole family telling their version of events, basically saying that I had sabotaged Preston's party on purpose, that I had forced everyone to choose between the two events, and that I was an ungrateful son who didn't respect his family. The email was long, like 3 full pages of complaints and accusations, and included things that simply weren't true, like that. Supposedly, I had called Preston to tell him his party was going to be a failure, and that nobody was going to go. Which I never did. My cousins forwarded me the email, and I read it completely, feeling more and more upset, because not only were they lying, but they were trying to manipulate the whole family to get them on their side. I decided that was enough. Like I'd spent years letting things go and trying to keep family peace, but this had crossed all possible boundaries. I sat down in the hotel room with my laptop and wrote my own email to the whole family. A long, detailed email explaining the entire timeline of events with proof. I included screenshots of the dates when invitations were sent, text messages from conversations with my parents and with Preston, basically all the evidence I had that I hadn't done anything wrong, and that Preston had orchestrated this whole situation. I also included information about Preston's past behaviors that the family might not have known about. Things I had let go for years, like the time he ruined my college graduation party by making a scene because he didn't like the food, or when he convinced my parents not to help me financially with my first apartment because, according to him, I didn't need it as much as he did. I sent that email on Sunday afternoon, and responses started coming almost immediately. Most of my extended family was horrified by the things my parents and Preston included in their email, and several of them told me that after reading my version of events, They had decided to cut off contact completely with my parents and Preston until they apologized. My uncle Roberto called me personally to tell me that he and his whole family were no longer going to talk to my dad, that this had been the straw that broke the camel's back after years of watching my parents favor Preston, and that I had all his support. Honestly, I didn't expect things to escalate so much. I thought maybe some relatives were going to be on my side, but not that. Basically, my whole extended family was going to decide to do a complete boycott of my parents and Preston. Over the next few weeks, the situation only got worse. My parents started sending more emails to the family trying to defend themselves. Preston created a WhatsApp group trying to explain his version of things, but nobody was believing them, and most of the family was simply ignoring them. Sarah and I decided to take a break from all the drama and disconnect for a while. We postponed our honeymoon that we'd planned for November because honestly we were too emotionally exhausted to enjoy it at that moment, and we focused on settling into our new married life and trying to process everything that had happened. About a month after the wedding, a Tuesday night if I remember correctly, I got a call from an unknown number and answered, thinking it was a telemarketer or something. But it was Preston. I was surprised he called because we hadn't talked since before the wedding. And when I answered, he immediately started yelling, saying I had ruined his life. That because of me, the whole family hated him. That he'd lost relationships with several relatives who were important to him. And that I should fix this. I told him I had nothing to fix, that he had started all this with his stupid birthday party, and that the consequences were his responsibility. And he started saying that I'd always been a selfish brother, that I never cared about him, that I was always the family favorite, and a bunch of things that frankly didn't make sense considering our parents literally missed my wedding to go to his party. That call lasted like 40 minutes of Preston, basically yelling at me and me trying to stay calm and explain that he had made his choices and had to live with the consequences. But it was pointless. He was convinced this whole situation was my fault. Eventually, I hung up because there was no point in continuing to talk, and I told Sarah about the call and she suggested that maybe we should consider cutting off contact completely with Preston and my parents, at least for a while, to protect our mental peace. I agreed, but I also felt guilty. Like part of me still thought maybe I should try to fix things. But Sarah reminded me that you can't fix something when the other person doesn't recognize they did anything wrong. About 2 weeks after that call, my parents called asking for a conference call. They said they wanted to resolve all this as a family and that Preston was also going to be on the call. I agreed against my better judgment. Sarah was with me during the call, and I put it on speaker so she could hear too. The call started relatively calmly. My parents said they wanted to find a way for the family to be united again, that this had gone too far, and that we all needed to forgive and forget. I told them I was open to a conversation, but that first I needed them to recognize that what Preston did was wrong and that they chose to support him instead of going to my wedding, and that's when everything went to hell. Preston started yelling that he hadn't done anything wrong, that he had the right to celebrate his birthday however he wanted. My parents said I was being unreasonable to expect an apology, and my mom even said that I should apologize to them for causing all this family drama. I asked them specifically what I had done to cause drama, and my dad said that I had sent that long email to the family poisoning them against Preston, and I reminded them that I only sent that email after they sent their own email full of lies about me. The conversation went in circles for like an hour. They basically wanted me to admit it was all my fault, that I'd apologize to Preston, and that I'd help restore their reputation with the extended family. And I obviously said I wasn't going to do any of those things. The call ended with Preston yelling that I was a piece of shit and that he wished he'd never met me. My parents saying they were very disappointed in me and that if I didn't fix this, I'm going to lose my family forever. And I simply hung up, feeling exhausted and sad. And that we definitely needed to cut off contact with them because clearly it wasn't going to get anywhere. I blocked Preston from everywhere that same night. I also blocked my parents after sending them a message, saying I didn't want to have contact with them until they were ready to have a real conversation, where they recognized their part in all this. I thought that would be the end. That eventually, they'd calm down, and maybe, in a few months or years, we could try to fix things. But no, things got even worse. About 2 weeks after the conference call, a Saturday in the early morning around 4 a.m., Sarah and I woke up to someone pounding on our door like crazy, like banging on the door so hard we thought it was an emergency. I got up all scared, looked through the peephole, and it was Preston with my parents standing there outside on the porch. It was still dark, raining, and they were out there, soaked, yelling for me to open the door, that they needed to talk to me, that this couldn't wait. I didn't open the door, obviously. I yelled through the door for them to leave or I'd call the police, and Preston started yelling that I was a coward, that I couldn't even face them. My mom was crying, saying they just wanted to talk to me, that I was their son and they missed me. I repeated that they should leave, that if they wanted to talk, they could do it at a normal hour and with prior notice, not showing up at my house at 4 a.m. on a Saturday, but they didn't leave. They kept knocking on the door and yelling for like 20 minutes. The neighbors started turning on their house lights. One even came out on his porch to see what was happening. And finally I called the police because this was ridiculous. The police arrived like 15 minutes later. By that time, Preston and my parents were sitting on the porch waiting. I guess they thought I'd eventually give in and open the door. The officers talked to them, then knocked on my door, and I talked to them explaining the situation, that they were my family, but that we had problems, and that I'd repeatedly asked them to leave, but they refused. The officers told my parents and Preston they had to leave my property immediately or they'd be arrested for trespassing. And finally they left. But before leaving, Preston yelled at me that this wasn't over, that I was going to regret treating them like this. That threat was enough for me. The next day I called a lawyer that one of my cousins who works in legal recommended, and I explained the whole situation from the beginning, including the 4 a.m. incident. The lawyer told me I had grounds to request a temporary restraining order against all three, that the pattern of harassing behavior and Preston's threat were enough for a judge to consider it. Initially, I wasn't. Sure, I wanted to go that far. But Sarah convinced me by telling me we needed to protect ourselves, that if they were capable of showing up at 4 a.m. at our house, who knows what else they'd be capable of doing. We filed the papers for the restraining order that same week. The lawyer included all the documentation from the police incident, transcripts of the threatening emails they'd sent, recordings of the phone calls where Preston yelled at me. Basically, we built a solid case that there was a pattern of harassment. My parents and Preston were notified of the hearing for the restraining order. And according to my cousin, Laura, who still had limited contact with my mom, they couldn't believe I'd gone that far. They were telling everyone I was crazy, that I was attacking them legally for no reason. But the hearing was like a month later. It was in civil court and I had to testify about the whole situation. The lawyer presented all the evidence, and the judge listened to everything, very attentively. Preston and my parents also testified. They tried to paint me as the villain of the story, said I had orchestrated all this to alienate them from the family, that the 4 a.m. incident had simply been a desperate attempt to reconnect with me. But the judge didn't believe them, especially after the police officer who responded to the call that day also testified about what he'd witnessed. The judge asked directly why they had thought it was appropriate to show up at my house at 4 a.m, and none of them could give a coherent answer. Preston even got aggressive with the judge at one point, and the bailiff had to remind him to calm down. In the end, the judge granted a temporary restraining order of 2 years against all three, Preston, my mom, and my dad, which means they can't contact me in any way. They can't come within 100 meters of me or my house, and if they do, they can be arrested. I left that court feeling strange, like relieved but also sad, because I never thought my relationship with my family would come to this, to having to use the legal system to keep them away from me. Sarah hugged me in the court parking lot and told me I'd done the right thing, that now we could finally live in peace without worrying about them showing up at our door in the middle of the night. It's been about 3 months since the restraining order, and honestly my life has improved a lot. I know it sounds horrible to say it like that, but it's the truth. Sarah and I finally were able to take our honeymoon last month. We went to Costa Rica for 2 weeks and it was amazing. We were able to really relax for the first time in months, without constantly worrying about what Preston or my parents were going to do. My extended family continues to be super supportive. My cousins visit me often. My uncle Roberto calls me every week to see how I am, and I feel like I have more family now than when I had contact with my parents. Which is ironic, considering they always said family was the most important thing. Sometimes I feel guilty. I'm not going to lie. There are nights when I wonder if I went too far, if I should have tried one more time to fix things before getting to the restraining order, but then I remember everything that happened. How my parents chose Preston's birthday party over my wedding, how they yelled at me at my reception, how they showed up at my house at 4 in the morning, and I realize I did what I had to do to protect myself and protect my wife. Preston never apologized. My parents never recognized they did anything wrong. And I can't force them to change. The only thing I can do is decide what kind of people I want in my life. Sarah is pregnant now. We just found out 2 weeks ago, and we're super excited. It's going to be our first child, and honestly, it scares me a little to think about how I'm going to explain to them someday why they don't know my parents or their Uncle Preston, but I guess I'll cross that bridge when I get to it. For now, I'm focused on building my own family with Sarah, on maintaining relationships with the extended family that does support me, and on letting go of the pain and disappointment of what happened with my parents and my brother. The restraining order expires in like a year and a half, and I don't know what's going to happen when that occurs. If they're going to try to contact me or if they'll just continue with their lives without me. But honestly, right now I don't care much. I've learned that you can't force people to treat you well, and that sometimes the healthiest thing is to simply walk away, even if those people are your family.